Morning. My name's Ray Gorman. I'm minister at Carlton Uniting Church, more often known as Church of All Nations, and I'm also a member of the Joint Nominating Committee that's searching for a new minister for you. I'm one of the two presbytery representatives, although rather bizarrely I'm actually not from your presbytery but from Yarra Yarra, but just never mind. Good to be with you today. Our series, Arts, Theology and the World, that I think you'll be continuing on with for the rest of this year. First thing I want to do is thank Toorak Uniting that through your involvement with the Toorak Ecumenical Group, you took the initiative in making a donation last year of some pantry items and bringing them over for distribution in the residents of the high-rise estate. The church building is literally on the grounds of 5 very high-rise where mainly Horn of Africa residents are well dwelling. Very much appreciated. Our CEO, Cheryl Laurie, was going around for days saying, oh, and it was really good stuff too, which it isn't always. So thank you for that. I have no particular qualifications for speaking on this topic, art, theology and the world. I'm not an art critic or historian, nor even a particular practitioner of the arts. But I am a person who enjoys beauty and colour and creativity and imagination. And a minister of over 30 years who's had to stand and deliver spoken words every week with the hope and the prayer that, as we say, through the written word and the spoken word, may the living word be made present. That's an art, I guess. Not my doing, but the artfulness of the Creator God. So if we're going to use a broad understanding of what constitutes art, then in that sense, maybe all of us here have an interest in today's topic. A good way to start into this topic, theology, arts and the world, is to start where you are. And I mean that literally. We have gathered this morning for worship of the creative, imaginative power of the universe, surrounded by beautiful objects. Okay, I want to back off a little and say that let's just talk about those things that have been made by human hands, created. And we won't for the moment use the term art because, well, I've already given you a disclaimer, haven't I, that I'm not an art critic and historian. And as I thought back over that, I realised one of the reasons at least why I did that is I was feeling a little intimidated. I thought, what happens if there's a professional artist there on Sunday? What happens if there's a curator of a museum or an exhibition gallery or something and I know nothing about art? So that's just a little snippet of, yes, we can be a little bit intimidated because there's this world out there that's very esoteric of fine art and many of us feel that we are a bit locked out of that world. So let's just talk about the objects that we see. So pause, have a look around. Let's take 30 seconds or a minute to just observe the environment that we are in. The building itself dates from 1875, I read somewhere. Architecture that raises our vision heavenward. Dazzling, coloured, stained glass windows. There's quite a few of them, isn't there? Each one of them telling a story, mostly drawn, perhaps all drawn from biblical narratives. Of course, they're better shown off in the low light, hushed atmosphere of a church. Adds to the mystique of being in a sacred space. Hangings, probably not part of the original, but art, theology and the world are in a dynamic conversation with each other. Lots of carved wood furnishings, pews, the font, the pulpit, the lectern, the communion table. Even the Bible open is an object of art, quite apart from the theological significance. And when we add the music that we've been hearing, and when we add the Kinross Centre, clearly here is a congregation that has some appreciation of the arts. And this is just a slice that the church over the years has engaged with and used in the worship of the Almighty Creator. Musicians, stonemasons, workers of precious metal, weavers, seamstresses for vestments, painters for altarpieces and frescoes and canvases, dancers and singers. It's no exaggeration to say that the church over the years was the primary custodian of the art and the talent of nearly all artists. So we can identify these objects. We can probably have a pretty good crack at what was the intent, what was the message, what was the theology behind the art. We have another part in our little exercise: theology, art, and the world. Now, it's quite clear just what do we mean by the world in the context of those three words. Is the world out there, whereas we are in here, in our sacred space that we've created apart from the world? You could almost be excused for thinking that was the original tent. I mean, look at these solid walls. Look at these windows that when you're inside dazzle with the light, but outside just a dullness. Someone pointed out once when I mentioned that, they said, "Oh yeah, but it works in the reverse at night, doesn't it, when the lights are on in here? It's all the people out in the world that are going to get the benefit of your wonderful stained glass windows." Is it the intent that we create in here an oasis from the hurly-burly, conflicted world? See, the natural world barely exists in most historical churches or cathedrals. I was about to say that and I noticed the flowers, so that perhaps is our, just trying to look around, our one concession to the natural world. The message is, rest a while in here, draw close to God and be renewed to once again take up the challenge of living in the created world. That world that you enter once again when you go back out the door. The dilemma is that it runs the danger of creating a gulf between the sacred and the profane and becomes seriously close to saying God lives in the church, whether that's understood as the building or the people. Don't look to the world for the presence of God, but here where God's people have created these beautiful objects to aid you in your quest. You need to find it here, for out there in the world, it's a fallen, sinful place. Interesting then that when you think about a modern church, it's been built with a different mindset, or we might say a different theology regarding the world. First and most obvious is that you still may find an architecture that elevates your eyes, but you're more likely now to find architecture that expresses a desire to connect and acknowledge and even bring the natural world into the worship space. Primarily, that would be light. Lots of light. And it's fair enough too. I mean, after all, what are God's first recorded words in the scriptures? Let there be light. So you can't argue against it. When we renovated the Uniting Church at Brunswick when I was there was a lively discussion on this. Those who wanted to replace the original frosted and dappled glass, not stained glass windows, we're just talking about those sort of yellowish frosted ones, partly to let in more light, but also because they said it is important for us when we are worshipping God to be able to see God's creation, to be able to see a tree, a bird, a cloud, the sun, and also people that are walking past in busy Sydney Road. And for those outside the building to be able to see inside. And the other theological shift has been the notion that God does not dwell on high architecturally speaking, but among God's people. No high and mighty soaring roofs and elevated pulpits for the preacher to ascend to in order to speak from on high. Seating is most often now in a semicircle where people can see each other. The sense is that we're sending a message, we're incarnating that God is found in the company of God's people. I grew up attending a Presbyterian church over in Ashburton. Over there in the early 1960s, we weren't much interested in art, but we were very much children of the Reformation. So we elevated the word of the Lord above all else. We had a functional yellow brick building, no concessions to adornment at all, for that surely would be a distraction to the pure worship of God and attract attention unto itself and lead to the worship of human ingenuity instead of the Creator. So we had no colour, no banners, no candles, no incense. The minister wore black, a black gown with, I think they're called preaching tabs, are they, Peter? Those little white things. If the sacred space we create to worship God reflects something of the qualities we believe that the eternal bears, then it was a pretty austere God we were worshipping at Ashburton in the early 1960s. Actually, there was one piece of furnishing that was not merely utilitarian. It was a navy blue cushion that sat on the pulpit, and guess what rested there? The Holy Scriptures. Here was a faith that could be expressed in propositions about God and God's law, and could be expressed in morality or ethics, because our good works were to flow from what we believed about God. It was a version of Christianity that was concerned with what you believed and did, but virtually no interest in aesthetics or what you felt. Now, there was no adornments in the church, but because I was a child, I was shown some pictures in Sunday school, many with images of Jesus, despite the prohibition in the Ten Commandments about creating an image of God. Probably the one I remember best is the one entitled Jesus Loves the Little Children of the World. I think there's a few different versions of it. I'm sure many of you will remember it. Jesus is sitting there in his flowing gowns and he has all the coloured children, I think in their national dress, crawling over his knees and all around, and I think there's even a little lamb in there. Not all the children of the world, it's just a representative sample of the children of the world. The other one, Jesus, the light of the world. Jesus carrying a lantern and knocking on a door. That one scared me a little because I didn't like the idea of Jesus banging on the door, and I didn't quite know what to make of that. We had the head of Christ, the praying hands. My only other memory of childhood art religious art was once I went into the home, only once as I recall, the home of the one Catholic family that lived in our street in Ashburton. And I did get a bit creeped out because on their wall in this dark lounge room was this picture of a soft, effete-looking Jesus pulling down his tunic and pointing to his beating heart. That put the wind up a little 7 or 8 year old boy. So this was all art put to a devotional, or dare I say it, an evangelical purpose. The sort of art you'll find in abundance in many Christian bookstores. The sort of art that frankly comes up short very often, not in intent, although I think a lot of it does lack skill or ability, but not so much in morals, but in imagination. An imagination informed by theology, an imagination that is in constant dialogue with the world. Because we are made in the image of God the Creator, we are destined to be creators in images and stories. It's in our DNA, our flesh and bones. Jesus, the Logos, the Word, the creative mind behind the universe. And the Bible is shot through with narratives and images, some bizarre, some everyday, drawn from the natural world, some the clash of human cultures and empires, of wars and betrayals and power struggles and prophets. And artists use all of this as the raw material because they are sensitised to images, pictures and stories. And in the scriptures, we have access to much of that. And the arts have the potential to make it visible and hearable and touchable for us. Makoto Fujimura, a Japanese-American artist, said, "The arts are a cup that will carry the water of life to the thirsty. It's not the water itself, it's the vessel." So we are left wondering, how on earth has the church managed to turn such a story, a narrative shot through with so much dramatic tension and existential angst, into a pretty tamed, world-weary, boring tale? Was it Kierkegaard, one of those, said Jesus turned water into wine, but we've made an art form of turning wine back into water. Today's reading from 1 Corinthians addresses this. Paul is addressing the claim that some of the Christians in Corinth are making that there is no resurrection of the body. Now, we haven't got time to go into the finery of Gnostic thought, but Paul, grounded in Jewish theology, insists that humans cannot exist apart from a bodily existence. And so, like Jesus, the firstborn of the new age, the new Adam, the first fruits, we shall also be raised with a body, but a spiritual body. There is continuity, a body, but discontinuity, a transformed body. So that's his argument. But today I'm more interested in the creative imagination that Paul and Jesus, when he is talking in the Beatitudes about a transformed, renewed world. I mean, this is crazy stuff. Love your enemy. Do good to those that harm you. Pray for those who curse you. But they are both displaying the vision of the artist. Some art we might call decoration, a hopefully pleasing portrayal of a scene or an object, pleasing the eye, but not especially challenging or confronting or likely to move us to great thought or feeling. But the artist's role is to go deeper, to capture this world, but great art will go further and take us beyond, penetrate the surface, reveal the glory and the mystique of what lies below. And Paul and Jesus are doing that today when they ask us to imagine that which does not exist, and in their vision that they hold before their hearers or their readers, to infuse them with the capacity to bring about the vision. Behold, I am doing a new thing. Do you not perceive it? We might say the artists do. We yearn of art to praise God, to glorify God, but also art that expresses the excruciating tension between this vision of a renewed world and the trammelled, distorted existence of the world we live in. Art that rages against the heavens in the name of the creator of those heavens. Art that laments and wails the destruction of the divine image in all people. It seems to me that much Christian art or literature or music is nice but bland, decorative but not transformative, because it's afraid of that gulf, and to enter into it somehow would be to dishonour God. And so the church in the modern time I'm talking about, not that historic period perhaps I was referring to earlier, the church along with society is guilty of not valuing the artists, partly because their apparent lack of productivity. I mean, what do they do all day? My goodness, sit around creating a drawing. We can see that because of the regular struggle for the arts funding. And in the pandemic funding, where did that go? There was so many artists and live performers, along with the universities, who were left out to dry. So let me finish with a quote, another quote, a paragraph from the person I quoted before, Makoto Fujimura. He says, "True art does not chase after novelty. Instead, it is a sensory quest towards the new order of what God is creating, towards fully realised humanity. Using our senses, art poses deeper questions rather than giving easy answers. To be truly human, we must redefine what the culture of fear and cynicism deems is the world that ought to be. The world that ought to be is not a utopia, it is instead created out of sacrificial love. To love is to quest for the world that ought to be. Love is enduring and uses all our senses. Love is generative and will create the stage for the new to appear. The role of the artist is to awaken all of our senses through creativity and love. Good.